Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Stuart Dempsey, and I'm a licensed battlefield guide here at Gettysburg National Military Park. This morning, I'm standing at Soldiers National Cemetery, the final resting place for 3,500 Union soldiers who perished as a result of the Battle of Gettysburg and who were commemorated by Lincoln's immortal address delivered just yards from here in November 1863. One of the early sparks for my interest in the American Civil War came from the knowledge that I had a number of ancestors who fought in that conflict, two of whom served here at the Battle of Gettysburg in July 1863. In point of fact, they're still here. They never left. Both were killed in action here during the battle. One is Sergeant Isaac Willis, whose grave is here at my feet. Willis was my great-great-uncle. He enlisted at age 19 in December of 1861. He came from Jackson County, Ohio, a small rural county in the south central part of the state, and specifically from a little place called Limerick, so small that it doesn't appear on many maps. It hasn't had a post office in over a century. Again, a rural, agricultural-based place. And Isaac Willis was a farmer's son. He was one of 13 children eventually born to Joseph and Sarah Willis, and he did not rush off to war when his country went to war in the spring of 1861. Farmers' sons were valuable entities, and I have to think that his father, Joseph, probably had some strong views about sending a second son to war. Isaac's older brother, Cyrus, had already enlisted and was serving in the 2nd West Virginia Cavalry. But as the war continued and as it became apparent that the war was going to be longer, tougher than previously expected, 19-year-old Isaac did enlist. He went to Chillicothe to rendezvous with the 73rd Ohio Volunteers, a hard-fighting regiment from the southern counties of the Buckeye State. Willis was not the only member of his family to enlist in the 73rd. His 33-year-old brother-in-law, Elisha L. Leake, had enlisted 17 days earlier. Leake was married to Isaac's sister and had 3 young children at home. That's what he was leaving when he went off to war to fight for his country. Far from ready, but the 73rd was sent in January of 1862 to operate in Western Virginia. And in the first several months of its service, the unit really found the microbes to be a bigger enemy than the rebels, as disease ravaged the regiment as it did so many others. At one point in March of 1862, over 300 men of the regiment were in hospital. Willis became extremely ill and, unusually for the time, was actually sent home to recuperate from his malady. He was home in Jackson County for several months, in fact, overstaying his leave, but he did voluntarily report back for duty in the summer of '62 after his recovery. He would see his first action at the Battle of Second Manassas in August of 1862. We've moved a few feet to the grave of my other ancestor, Private Elisha Leake. While his brother-in-law, Isaac Willis, was battling illness back in Ohio, Leake had his own trials and tribulations, being in and out of Army hospitals throughout the spring and summer of 1862. He would not be present at the Second Battle of Manassas, or Bull Run, when his brother-in-law saw his first fighting. And it would prove to be the bloodiest day in the long history of the 73rd Ohio Volunteers. For critical minutes on the afternoon of August 30th, 1862, the 73rd, along with 3 other slim Ohio regiments, were all that stood in the path of General James Longstreet's Confederate onslaught. Buying a crucial 30 minutes that made the difference between defeat and utter disaster, the 73rd performed well, but sustained its heaviest casualties of the war. 148 officers and men fell on Chin Ridge that afternoon. But Willis, a corporal, now in Company G of the 73rd, somehow miraculously survived Manassas uninjured. The next test for the 73rd would come many months later, here at the fields of Gettysburg. In the meantime, by the autumn, Private Leake had returned to the ranks, rejoined his brother-in-law in Company G, and Corporal Willis had his own moment of excitement when he was called before a court-martial to explain overstaying his medical leave the previous year. His answers must have been suitable because he was not only found not guilty, he was soon after promoted to the rank of sergeant, a rank he would hold here at the Battle of Gettysburg. At Chancellorsville in May of 1863, the 73rd was present but held in reserve and sustained very few losses in a fight that inflicted devastating casualties on many of their brother regiments. By mid-June of 1863, the 73rd was on the road with the rest of the Army of the Potomac, moving northward in a series of forced marches that would bring them in 2 short weeks from central Virginia all the way up to the Mason-Dixon line. Some of those men remembered the marches as the worst of the war, and in one particularly epic episode, the 73rd marched 38 miles in 24 hours, bringing them from Boonesboro, Maryland to Emmitsburg, Maryland. And at Emmitsburg, they had mercifully a couple of days off. On the morning of July 1st, the 73rd and their parent organization, the 11th Army Corps, departed Emmitsburg for the destination here, Gettysburg, where a battle had begun in the morning on the 1st. After arriving here at Cemetery Hill in the early afternoon, the 73rd was again held in reserve while their comrades from other units continued to march north toward their destiny on the northern plain. The men of the 73rd would have been eyewitnesses to the struggle and the ultimate defeat of their comrades on those fields to the north. And they had to stand tall that evening when the broken remnants of Union regiments began to flow back here to Cemetery Hill. Happily for them, no Confederate onslaught came that evening. They would not be put to the test on the 1st of July. The next day would be a very different matter. Overnight, Confederate sharpshooters, South Carolina men, had occupied positions along an unnamed low ridge about 400 yards to the west of me. As soon as it was light enough to see, those sharpshooters began peppering Union artillery crews on Cemetery Hill. This untenable situation had to be dealt with, and the 73rd was ordered to send 2 companies of skirmishers forward to drive the Confederates off that ridge. Just after 9 a.m., companies B and G moved out. This was going to be a bloody little affair. In a few short minutes, companies B and G, 70 men altogether, would lose nearly 50 casualties. Company G went into action 36 men strong. 23 would be killed or wounded in a few bloody minutes in the morning in a forgotten engagement just a little distance from here. The episode is perhaps best described by the company commander, Lieutenant Samuel Fellers. Fellers described the moment in which his company sustained such heavy losses as follows. The boys marched off on quick time, like heroes. On arriving on the ground, I discovered that the rebel sharpshooters had a crossfire on us. We were then ordered to advance over a rise. The boys, who were deployed 5 paces apart, all sprung to their feet and advanced as steady as iron, and picked every rebel as fast as one showed his head above the wheat. Both sides fought with a determination not to give ground, but we drove them out of reach of our gunners. In this charge, Company G suffered severely. We went in with 36 men and lost 23 killed or wounded. Among those casualties was Sergeant Isaac Willis, killed in action, and Private Elisha L. Leake, severely wounded. Although information isn't detailed, it seems that Willis was killed instantly, or nearly so, as he was advancing alongside his comrade, Private James Ray, who's buried alongside him a few feet from here. Unfortunately, Private Leake, his brother-in-law, had worse luck. His injury, while eventually fatal, would take a long time to kill him. A bullet struck him in the jaw, smashing it, and exited his right eye. He was rushed to the 11th Army Corps Hospital at the George Spangler Farm, unfortunately lingering for 6 days in agony that is, for me, unimaginable, before he finally expired. Both of these men were among the 49 fatalities suffered by the 73rd Ohio over the course of the battle. The Battle of Gettysburg was truly a bloodbath for the 73rd Ohio Regiment, a unit that had arrived here on the field on July 1st, numbering 338 officers and men, had suffered 136 casualties by the end of the 3 days, a 40% loss. Particularly grievous, 49 of those casualties were fatal ones, including, of course, as mentioned, Sergeant Willis and Private Leake. A common question that I get as a licensed battlefield guide here, and I'm sure many of my colleagues do, a common visitor question is, who is your Civil War hero? Who are the personalities that you find most interesting or most admirable? And I think most times when visitors ask that, they're thinking of some general, some commander, some prominent political leader. For me, the true heroes of the American Civil War are men who were buried here and in other cemeteries and in unmarked graves as yet undiscovered. And in particular, these men who wore blue, who went to war in order to preserve their union and to end human slavery in America. They are my true heroes. I am licensed battlefield guide Stuart Dempsey. I thank you for your time and for listening to the story, and hope to see you around the battlefield.